Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, welcome to our Zone Controls HBX webinar for today. Today we're going to be talking about our two main zone controllers, our Zone 550 and our Zone 500 zone controllers. As per usual, if you have any questions, feel free to answer any of our, or suggest any questions into the GoToWebinar questionnaire box, and try my best during the webinar or at the end of the webinar to answer any of your questions on there. My name is Ken Vieira. I'm sales and marketing with HBX, and yeah, we'll get started. As always, again, in terms of answering questions, I'll stay on about 5 minutes after the webinar is done and try to answer any of your questions on there. So the first system we're going to talk about in terms of our controller is our Zone 550. This zone controller we came out back in 2015, and it's a really unique kind of zone controller. This zone controller is not a standalone unit. It kind of works in conjunction with two certain thermostats, and if you want Wi-Fi capability, you add on a THM-0100 Wi-Fi Thermalinks module on there. So you can't use any of these devices on their own. They need to be working in conjunction with all each other. So it's kind of a whole system. So if you're just needing a stat or anything like that, then you have to use our standalone stats. You can't just use our THM-300, 500 stats as standalone products, as you can see here. So we'll talk about the zone controller, the thermostats, how to program it in terms of wiring, and we'll also look at the app as well with our Wi-Fi zoning system. So with our Zone 550, when we came out with it, we just didn't want to make your standard, Wi-Fi thermostat, just because that market is really saturated. There's a lot of different products on the market, so especially with radiant heating and cooling, usually you're going to use some sort of zone controller. So we decided to make that zone controller Wi-Fi enabled. So anything in terms of thermostats that are attached to it, we have full access through this Thermalinks Wi-Fi module on there. So in terms of capability of what we can do with the Zone 550 is that we can do pumps, zone pumps, zone valves, and also control dampers for forced air situations. So this can be used as a radiant zone controller, or you can just use it as a forced air zone controller with damper control, or you can actually use radiant and forced air all in one controller, which is real nice, just because typically, what I'm seeing a lot of is that you'll have, 3 or 4, in-floor zones, but, you may have a second stage fan cooler furnace just to help out with the heating and cooling, or you might have standalone zones that are just, strictly with just forced air. So it's kind of nice to have the capability of controlling the wet side of heating and the air side, and use it either in conjunction with one another or standalone zones on there. So it's real nice with the Zone 550. With the Zone 550 as well, we also have system pump control on there. So if you need us to control your main circulating pump, we can do that as well. All basic features. If you needed zone priority over zones through sequentials, or how you really want to customize it, we do have that zone priority. In terms of zoning with pumps, again, we have post purge and exercising. So post purge, after the heating demand has been satisfied, that zone pump will still be activated for 60 seconds just to post purge the water out. In terms of zones not working, maybe you only have that zone controller in terms of heating, even when it's currently not in operation. In the summer months, it will still exercise those pumps for every 72 hours. So that's just a built-in logic within the zone controller, and it will run for about 1 minute of operation, then shut off, and then reactivate for another 72 hours, just to prevent any any damage to that zone pump on there. Zone control also accommodates 2 demand outputs. So these are the demand outputs out to your boiler to make a TT. You can use that for if you're using a geothermal application. We'll get that in the next couple slides as well. We do have the capability of controlling 4 zones per module. So we kind of just do it the rule of 4. So The system is expandable, so if you needed more than 4 zones, you simply just add another zone controller, and they actually pair to each other, again, using radio frequency on there. The zone controller also accommodates terminal capability for humidity controller. So if you want to hook up your humidifier or dehumidifier, you can do either or. You have the capability of running that, and we also have a contact to run the fan as well on there. So in terms of looking all kind of what the LED lights mean, if that zone light is illuminated, that means we have a current demand, and that's currently in operation. So if you were to get a low temp or high temp call, that means you have a current demand for that zone on there. Your zone outputs, so 1 to 4, anytime those have been illuminated, that means that zone pump or zone valve is activated at the present time on there. The controller on the zone controller also displays if you have a current heating or cooling, as well as fan operation, and if you're either humidifying or dehumidifying on the zone controller as well. The green light just indicates that we have actually power to the zone controller unit as well, so this will be displayed as in green, and again, it's just 120 amperage volts, and 15 amps max amperage to actually power the unit itself on there. In terms of dampers, in terms of the LED lights, are a little bit different. So in terms of damper control, we can actually accommodate for normally open and normally closed dampers. So it has built-in logic on there for whatever damper that you're using. If you're using normally open dampers, if you have a heating or cooling call for that zone, the LED light will not be displayed, just because we're not sending any power to open them up. The only time you will actually see power to those zone outputs of the on those LED lights is that if one zone is calling for heating and there's no call for heat or cool to that zones, we'll give it power, power to that zone to close those dampers, because obviously we don't want to have any airflow going through that zone, just because there's no heater, no heating or cooling call at the end on there. If you're using normally closed dampers, the logic is just reversed on there. So it would work like our regular zone pumps or zone valves. Anytime there's a heating or cooling call to that zone, we'll give it power to open up those dampers on there. In terms of the demand outputs, by default it's set up as radiant heating or cooling on the controller. If you are using a geothermal applications, we do have geothermal modes built in. Simply you would just go into the setup on the zone controller on that very first zone and just tell the controller that we are doing a geothermal application. Once you do that, it actually changes the demand outputs out on the top there of the zone controller. So an LT will actually change to a heat demand, and your high temp demand actually switches to a cold demand on there. So that's important if you are doing a geothermal system. If you do not set the controller into that geothermal mode on there, your demand outputs will be in reverse. So when it calls for heating, it'll actually activate the cooling, and vice versa on there. So it's always make sure that when you are doing a geothermal system, you do put it into geothermal mode on there. So in terms of wiring and installation, it's very straightforward. How we get away with having one module that does zone pumps and zone valves is that we actually have an input terminal for the power. So again, just 120 to power the unit itself, and then you need to provide power to pins 11 and 12 at the bottom there. So if you're just using zone pumps, those require 120. You can just put a jumper wire from the input power that you put into the controller. If not, you just need to get grab power from a 24 volt transformer in the mechanical room and just put 24 volts into pins 11 and 12 to accommodate for dampers in your zone valves on there. Once you put any power into pins 11 and 12, it gets automatically distributed out to your zone output. So from all the terminals from pin 3 to pin 10. Again, these are dry contacts, so it's rated for 240 volts at 5 amps as well. And then also on pins 1 and 2, this can be activated for your system pump. Again, it's 240 at 5 amps on there. All your forced air wiring and communication is all at the top of the zone controller. So you have your RW, Y, and G and X. Your RW, Y, and G, if you were to make a heating call to your fan coil or furnace, you're going to activate that using the R and W on the top of the zone controller. To activate any cooling, you're going to use the R and Y. So again, this could be used for a fan coil or air conditioning unit. G is to operate for fan operation, and if you want to hook up your humidifier or dehumidifier, you want to use the X terminal from the top there as well. Again, your demand outputs, need to, obviously send demand to your boiler, or, your geothermal heat pump in terms of, how you have it set up for. So it's always, it's always key in terms of troubleshooting where, we have guys sometimes calling us, that, their zone thermostat is calling for heating, but their boiler is not firing up. First thing that we ask them is that, do you have your demand outputs hooked up to your boiler on there? So that's something you always want to make sure that, if something's not turning on, it's most likely a wiring issue to the zone controller. With the thermostats, so you can only use 2 sets of thermostats with the Zone 550. You can use our touchscreen, our THM-500, and use our digital THM-300, which we'll talk about on there. The biggest compliment that we get with these thermostats is that it's only a 2-wire thermostat back to the zone controller. So it's getting its power and its communication back to the zone controller, so you don't have to put 24 volts or anything electrical in terms of powering the unit itself. It's getting that from the zone controller, so we can do up to 2 stages of heating and 2 stages of cooling, plus humidity controller off those 2 wires. So that's really makes it great for those retrofit applications. If you're doing an older home before 1990, a lot of times those older thermostats, if they haven't been upgraded, only have 2 wires. So it really solves the 2-wire problem, with the Wi-Fi zoning system on there. So as I mentioned before, we can do 4 zones per module. In terms of adding on more zones, again, you just add on another Zone 550. And the way you connect them is that you don't have to wire them or daisy chain them together through wires. They actually, communicate wirelessly through radio frequency. So what you really need to do, so anywhere from Zone 1 to Zone 4, your first Zone 550 is your master zone controller. So in terms of your setup, you just put that as your master zone controller, and everything else is kind of paired to that master on there. So zones 5 to 8, 9 to 12, in terms of your setup sequence, that's what will determine your pairing to the master zone controller. On there. So again, the way you would do that is on your very first thermostat on the zone controller, zones 1 to 4. You would just go in your zone setup, and you would select master ID. There, the thermostat would automatically display discovery mode, and then you would do exactly the same thing in terms of your second Zone 550 or third Zone 550. You would put in zone sequence 5 to 8, 9 to 12. Once you do that, when you change that zone sequence, it automatically changes the options to pairing to that master. So again, you would just hit pair to master. Once you do that, it will be a 60-second timer. After that 60 seconds has elapsed, it'll actually tell you if pairing was successful or unsuccessful on there. Communication between the zone controllers is about 2,000 feet open air range. So, a lot of distance in terms of, where you want to put these zone controllers. So say you have, separate mechanical rooms. Maybe you have, you just bought a new bay, as a commercial space, and you want to, make everything into one system. You don't have to wire them or daisy chain them together. You can just pair them, again, through that radio frequency network on there. In terms of distance, you also always want to make sure, that distance shrinks depending on how many walls or how many concrete you're going through. If you put the zone controller into like a metal enclosure, you want to make sure, think about that as well on there. In terms of if you do want Wi-Fi to the system, the Thermalinks module, so the TMX100, always needs to be installed on the master zone controller. You only need 1 of these per system, so it can do up to 20 zones in terms of in terms of the pairing process. So you can pair up to 5 Zone 550 controllers to each other. But you only need 1 Wi-Fi module to have the whole system connected to that Wi-Fi network on there. If you were to put that TMX in terms of, onto the second or third zone controller, a pairing zone controller, once you've kind of downloaded the app and, hooked up your stats, you would just see nothing getting uploaded on the app. Once you, take that TMX100 and put it to that master zone controller, you would see all your thermostats populate on the app on there. So that's kind of a troubleshooting thing to look for, that we do get calls on, sometimes that, everything's hooked up, but they're not able to see any of their zoning thermostats on the app. It's just because it's not on that master zone controller on there. So again, the only stats that we can use is our THM-500 or in our THM-300. In terms of functionality, everything is the same in terms of the 500 and the 300 series sequence. The only thing that the 500 can do is that we can provide humidity controller with that 500 stat. So if you need humidity control, then you will need to go to that 500 stat. If not, if humidity is not a thing that you require, you can mix and match the stats, no problem, on the zone controller. So with the zone controller, we can do up to 2 stages of heating and 2 stages of cooling. We provide you with included floor sensor. So if you wanted to sense the floor temperature with these stats, you can do that as well. You can also run the stat off of air, just off of room air temperature, or we actually have a dual method as well. So if you wanted the capability of sensing the floor and the air temperature, we can do that. So how that really works is that we have a floor minimum and floor maximum temperature. So if your floor were to ever go below or above those parameters, then the floor is driving that stat. If your floor is always between them, then it's going off by air on there. So you have the option of doing both with our stats with the 3 different modes on there. Our stats are also work off that PID algorithm. So it's really looking to not undershoot or overshoot on that slab on there. It's really the derivatives part of the algorithm, hence the D on there, that really is suited for radiant applications. Most radiant thermostats in the market only have the P and the I, but again, it's that derivatives part that actually allows us to shut off a lot sooner or turn on a lot sooner using that PID algorithm. So in terms of the stats, there's a lot of different functions in terms of setup, how you want them to be worked with that. With the 500 stats and with the 300s, we actually have these 2 big capacitors built onto them. So this is where it's getting its power from the zone controller on there. Since these capacitors are quite big, especially on the 500, once you've wired these stats up to the zone 500, it takes about 2 minutes for them to actually turn on there. It's just charging these caps to turn on. So if you just install them, you're not wondering why after a minute it's not turning on there. It just needs 2 minutes to actually power up with those 500 stats on there. With the 300 stats, the digital stats, it will come on right away. The stat screen will flicker for about a minute or so, just because it's charging up, and then it will go away. So don't think there's an issue with the 300 stat on there. It's just it's just getting its charge to the full capacity of those capacitors on there. So in terms of navigating the touchscreen stat, if you need to get into your setup menu, you just hit the top right-hand bar with the 3 dashed lines on there. In terms of changing the temperature, you simply just touch the temperature number on there, and you're able to minimize or blow or increase that target in terms of temperature. On the 500 stats, in terms of icons, you'll see if you have a current heating demand or cooling demand. You can see if the fan is turned on as well. If you see a raindrop, that means you have some sort of humidity demand on there. So everything on the main interface is displayed with the stat as well. You're able also, if the system is connected to Wi-Fi, you're also able to see the outdoor temperature of your location. You simply just add that on the app, and once you've entered it, after about 30 seconds, the temperature will get displayed on the stat as well. It will have a dark idle screen, so when it's not in operation, it will be in black and white on there. Especially at nighttime, you don't want to get distracted on there. You have that option on there. To get into the real deep ways of setting up the stat, if you just hold down again that top right hand, the 3 dash lines, that setup bar there, if you hold it down for about 5 seconds, it allows you to take you into your special function screen. So here's where you can adjust what you want the stat to do. If you want it to just be heating only, if you want it to be doing 2 stages of heat or 2 stages of heat with cool, it's all done through the special functions options on there. With the stat, you're also able to lock out the stat as well. So if you were to lock out the stat, say you have it for a commercial application, and the owner doesn't want his employees really messing around with the settings or anything like that, by locking out the stat, they're only able to increase the temperature 3 degrees above or below that temperature. That's it. They don't have any access of the stat using that lockout feature on there. You have also the option of setting like, what information you want to see on the stat. So if you just want to see the temperatures and not the demands, you can, turn view auto off. You can also put in room offset. So if you ever were to, place these thermostats, in a bad location, maybe you're, weren't thinking about it, where maybe direct sunlight is hitting the stat all the time. So it's actually making it thinking it's a lot warmer than actually is. You actually can put an offset temperature of like, as many degrees as you want to on there, just accommodate for that placement on that temperature on there. If you don't want schedules, you can have setbacks turn on and off. If you always want to maintain the same temperature, no scheduling, you have the ability to do that as well on there. In terms of, again, just adjusting the thermostat, when it is locked out, you'll see, a little lock on there, and you can see that the menu option has been removed on there. In terms of locking on the stat, again, if you need to adjust the temperature, you just select the numbers on the thermostat to increase or decrease the temperature on there. To navigate the setup menu, again, just hit the 3 dashed lines on there, and here you have the option to select target temperature in terms of scheduling. You have the capability of having auto changeover, or just making that stat into a heating stat or cooling stat, depending on what time of the year it is on there. The thing I like about auto changeover, if it's a heater cooling zone, you don't have to mess around with it. The stat will automatically go into heating and cooling based off the temperature parameters that you put in for that zone on there. So if you wanted, that space to always heat at, 21 degrees Celsius, and then cool at, when it gets to, 25 on there, you have the option to do that automatically for you, which is real nice on there. So in terms of scheduling, we give you weekend and weekday schedules, so you could have heating and cooling targets. If it is a heat or cooling stat on there, you have the capabilities to do that as well. You also have the capability of putting the stats into an away feature. So if you're, if you want a certain temperature in terms of heating for that location when you're at work, or if you go on vacation, you can just enter an away temperature and just select that to turn on and turn off, and so it automatically will override your schedules and go into that away feature on there. And again, this is all accessible through the HBX Thermalinks app on there. In terms of your thermostats, you have the capability of telling that zone if you're using zone valves or zone pumps. So if you were to select that to use zone valves, what really this does is just activates your system pump on there. So in zone pumps, you're going to have your system pump turn on right away. If you're using zone valves, there actually will be a 30-second delay when that system pump turns on, so you're not deadheading that zone valve on there, just because some valves are open a lot quicker than others on there, and you don't want that to minimize that. So that's where the zone valve feature is an option on there. Again, what you want the thermostats to be sensing, room temperature or floor temperature, you have different options for that as well. You have options for the sensor. So say the system wasn't connected to Wi-Fi and you wanted to see the outdoor temperature based off a sensor, you can do that as well. Or if you have, you want to use the thermistor built into the stat and use an external sensor to room average, you can do that as well on there. If you're just using, specifically just, or just doing off the floor temperature, you can also set a differential on there, so you're not short cycling, when you are using the floor. So again, with the way we do our differentials is that we do half below and half above that temperature target based off the differential on there. In terms of, again, using the dual mode, you can put a floor min and floor max. If your floor is between them, then it's going off by air temperature within the stat on there. Common thing that we see a lot of guys, calling in is that when they're installing the zone controllers, is that they see 3 dashed lines on the stats on there. So if you see these 3 dashed lines, that means you've told the controller that you're using some sort of auxiliary sensor options in there, but without actually any sensor being attached to the thermostat on there. So, if you see this, that means you've set it up, or you just haven't installed that sensor that you're wanting to use it for within the thermostat as well on there. With the stats, there's also capability of having 2 external sensors on there. So if you're doing maybe you're having all these thermostats in a remote location, you have the option to do that. So we added a dip switch on the back of the zone controller to use that second additional sensor either internally or externally within that stat as well on there. So in terms of other options that you can use, especially for the contractors within the stat, is that you can also, again, in your zone setup, set the sequence on there. You can also set the demand. So if it's a low temp or high temp, you're telling that stat that we're doing a radiant application on there. If you were to change that demand to fan coil, that means we're activating the heating and cooling off of the air terminals on the top of the zone controller. So if it's if it's set up for fan coil, that means that we're only doing air for that zone on there. So that activate your fan coil, furnace, or your air conditioning unit. If you do anything with 2 stages of heating or cooling, that means your first stage is always going to be off the bottom of the zone controller. So that means we're doing radiant as your first stage, and then your second stage will automatically activate off the air terminal. So that, again, that could be for heating or cooling for that second stage on there. In terms of your damper modes, in your zone setup, if you are set it up as a damper, again, you have the option to do a single normally open or normally close option. We also provide you with the option to do a 2-stage normally open or normally closed damper. So what that means is that we've come across is that your first stage, you're zoning with pumps or valves, but that second stage fan coil also has a damper as well. So we're actually requiring to use 2 damper outputs, 2 zone outputs for that one zone. So you can actually combine those zone outputs for one thermostat, which is real nice, which we actually see quite often, especially in the geothermal applications on there. So we have that capability of actually using 2 outputs for one zone. In terms of your fan coil setup, you have the option to turn that fan on whenever there's a heating or cooling demand on there. If your fan coil also requires us to activate a zone pump or zone valve, you have the option to turn that on with zone on demand on there. And there, you can, temperature average between, 4 zones per fan coil or furnace or air conditioning unit for your fan coil setup. And in terms of your fan operation, you can have it, run all the time on there, or we can have intermittent options. So if you wanted your fan to turn on every 5 minutes for every hour, or 2 hours, you can customize that to how long you want that fan to work intermittently on there. In terms of humidity control options, you simply can always maintain a certain target all the time in terms of humidification. You can tell the controller if you're wanting it to do humidity or dehumidify. You have the option of running your fan all the time whenever there's demand for humidity. We also have an auto humidity feature on there. So if you were to select auto, it'll actually, based off your location, actually adjust your target based off your outdoor temperature, so for what your indoor temperature humidity should be used for on there. So it makes it real nice in terms of kind of just doing it automatically for you. A lot of people don't know when they should be adjusting their humidity targets. So by using this, it kind of alleviates any issues in terms of seeing any moisture on your windows or anything like that on there. In terms of your time setup, you can adjust it for any time zone that you're currently located across the US and Canada. You can manually adjust the time in the week if it's not hooked up to Wi-Fi. Once it's hooked up to Wi-Fi, it automatically kind of does the time setup for you, just because it's it's getting that information based off the internet on there. So in terms of using the external sensors, as I mentioned before, the stats do come with one external sensor already. If you wanted to accommodate a second sensor, you can do that as well. So a lot of these applications that we're doing is that a lot of people are kind of putting all their thermostats in the mechanical room and just running sensors for floor sensing, or they can actually put a a drywall flush mount sensor from our stats on there as well. All our sensors that we use is a 10K ohm type 2 thermistor on there. So if you need to purchase a second one, it doesn't necessarily have to be an HBX sensor. You can be anybody else's sensor as long as it's follows that 10K ohm resistance on there that will be compatible within our thermostat. So you have the option, it really depends how you want to use it. You can have the stat in the room. You can put this flush mount sensor on there if you wanted to. You can paint over it. Since you have the app, I know it really, may not necessarily an option for you in terms of, what do you want to use, sensors or just have thermostats on the wall on there. If you need to do humidity, we're not capable of having a flush mount sensor that can control humidity. So if you need humidity, that stat will need to be in that zone. In terms of other options you can get from HBX, our sister company is TAMS Hydronics, and they actually specialize in prefabricated panels. So we've done numerous projects where kind of just helping out the contractors, where we kind of program and wire all the controls into like a a control box on there. So if you need a specific job where this is what you kind of want, you want to have all the thermostats in the mechanical room along with the zone controllers, and you just run sensors through that. So we can provide that for you as well with the HBX package on there. We can also, in terms of controlling mechanically stuff, so if you want us to do, control the zone pumps and do the whole works for that, we can accommodate that as well on there. So just something to keep in mind for these kind of bigger projects with HBX on them. So in terms of getting everything connected to Wi-Fi, the system doesn't need Wi-Fi to run. It'll still work as a normal zone controller on there, but it's kind of nice. Everybody nowadays kind of wants to see and monitor their system on there. Again, you only need one of these TMX ThermaLinks Wi-Fi modules to your zoning system. Again, this must be installed on the master zone controller, or you go into your zones on the app on there. We try to make it kind of the setup to Wi-Fi as simple as possible. So really it's just like, me coming over your house and asking what your Wi-Fi name and password is, and that's it. You simply, plug in this to the side of the zone, of the Zone 550. We do provide you with the cable. You can't use, a regular Ethernet cable. It's a little bit different in terms of how we do it. So if you, need a longer length, just ask us and we'll supply you with one. So you can't just put any Ethernet cable in there. It actually will cause damage either to the ThermaLinks module or to the Zone 550 control box. So keep that in mind on there. But in terms of setup, on the top left-hand corner on the side of the module, there's a little button. You hold that down for 10 seconds. Once you release that, it actually takes you, actually starts the Wi-Fi communication process on there. So once you see the red LED light start flashing, you would open up your Android or Apple phone, go into your Wi-Fi settings, and there you're going to see a ThermaLinks network with a 4-digit number. You simply just connect to that network. Once you see the check mark, you just simply open up the HBX app, and there, if you're using Android, it will automatically pull up any Wi-Fi networks that are available. For Apple users, you're actually going to just enter your Wi-Fi network name and password into your Wi-Fi setup, and just simply connect and select connect now. There from now on, you'll see a 120-second timer. Through this process, you're going to want to look at the TMX100. If you see all 3 of the LED lights on, that means you've connected and you're ready to add stats to the app on there. If any situation where you don't see all 3 LED lights on there, there's something wrong in the process in terms of connecting to Wi-Fi on there. So there's only 2 reasons why, if you're doing everything correctly, you're not connected to Wi-Fi. You can only use numbers and letters in the Wi-Fi password name on there. So you can't have like @ symbols or dollar symbols or exclamation marks. It only can be numbers or letters on there. So you will need to change the network password to accommodate for us connecting to your system on there. The other reason is that if you're in a bigger facility, maybe it's in a commercial space, usually there's some IT guys involved in there, and they may lock down a lot of ports. So the only port that will not allow us to communicate back to our server is by locking 1314 port. So if you see the Wi-Fi symbol, it's steady. That means we're connected to Wi-Fi, but we're just not able to actually send information past that port on there. So you simply just need to tell your IT guy to open up that port, and we're able to connect online. So it's very easy, very nice that any contractor in terms of how IT savvy is should be able to connect through the system to Wi-Fi, even for end users, for the homeowners on there. So once you've hooked up your system, now we can kind of look towards the app on here. So in terms of setup, if you want to see your temperature, you simply download the ThermoLinks app. And again, it's available for Apple and Android devices. Here you can add your location. So if you want to see the temperature on the stat or on the app, that'll get displayed as well. We can accommodate for US and Canada in terms of how you want to see it in Fahrenheit or Celsius. And you can also adjust your location time zone on there. In terms of adding stats to the app, it's real straightforward. So each thermostat has its own identifier, so it has a sync code and password. You simply just select add device on the app. There you just enter that sync code and password, add a location. So as a contractor, you can have as many locations on the app. There's no cap. You can it's not we're not charging for anything for this as well, so you can have as many locations on there. So here you can put Miller residence, Wilson residence, or if it's your own home, just put home, select that and hit save, and all your thermostats will populate on there. So as long as all your thermostats are wired in, the zone controller knows that it's part of the system. It'll automatically pull up all your stats. So you don't have to individually add each stat to the app, which is kind of real nice here. So once you've added your thermostats, you can give each zone a customized name on there. Once you do that, that will be displayed on the thermostat as well. And then from here on, you can see exactly all your zones, what they're currently doing. So you can see if it has a heating or cooling demand. You can see, if the fan is just running on there. You could add other Wi-Fi or HBX controllers to that location. So say you had maybe a couple, radiant zones in terms of heating or cooling, and you had a snow melt zone that you're using our snow melt controller. You can add that zone to that location on there. So you have, everything on one app on there. If you were to select one zone, you have a lot of different zone options as well. So here, if you just want to increase or decrease the target, you can do that as well. Any changes that you do with the app, the save button will start flashing, indicating that, hey, you changed something, and it'll let you know that if you actually want to save that, to actually save it through the HBX app on there. Here again, you can adjust all your schedules in terms of your heating and cooling for weekend and weekday. Again, you have the options to change your fan options through the app. Again, for your away modes on there. So on the initial setup, you just have to put each zone what temperature you want it to be in away. Once those have been set up, we kind of have a universal home and away mode. On the main user interfaces, you simply just have to select that button, and it'll let you know that if you want all the stats to go into that home and away, to automatically do that, and vice versa on there. You can also get alarm notifications through the app. So what you do is you just put a temperature trigger. If it were to go above or below that temperature trigger, you would get an email notification that, hey, maybe your domestic hot water tank dropped to 80 or 90 degrees. It'll let you know that, hey, you may want to check it out because it may be a mechanical issue within the system on there. You have the capability of putting up to 2 emails per system, so the homeowner can put his email, can put his contractor also on there, so they get some alarm notification for that application on there. In terms of advanced settings on there, so if I were to go back here, to get that advanced settings, you need to call HBX tech support, and we need to get you a contractor's code on there. So these are all the settings that you would have, kind of internally within that thermostat, but it's all displayed through the HBX app on there. And the reason that we just don't give that is that we typically don't want the end user to have access to these, because as we tend to learn that if it's on your phone, people tend to play with these settings, and these settings can really kind of mess up your system. So it's kind of just dedicated for the contractors on there. So here, in terms of setup, you can set up your entire system through your phone or your tablet on there. So here you can adjust what are we doing? Are we doing 2 zones of heating? Just heating only, cooling only. You can adjust your fan coil setup, what you want those thermostats to be, sensing based off air or floor, or both if you wanted to. Here you can also set your priorities. So you can have, in terms of your priority setup, you can have multiple number 1s, number 2s, number 3s, and really customize how you want your heating and cooling to take place for that application on there. You have the ability to reset all your settings to factory if you wanted to. through the app. So if somebody really messed up their system, you can start fresh and just reset those all back to your factory settings on there. So that's really the Wi-Fi zoning system in a nutshell. We do have our Zone 500 option on there as well. So this is our kind of your everyday zone controller. So with the Zone 500, we can do again 4 zones, pumps or valves on there. Again, you just need to supply whatever power supply to control that pumps or valves through pins 11 and 12. With the Zone 500, it's really kind of unlimited expandability. If you needed more than 4 zones, you just add another Zone 500, and they actually just connect to the side of each other using a 32-pin connector on there. It is again disk selectable on the back on there, so you can change how you want your priorities. This is how you would tell your zone controller that you're using pumps or valves. You can put into geothermal settings as well. The Zone 500 again can be expandable, used as an expansion module with any of our CP1000 or Eco 1000 controllers as well on there. So it's real easy to use. One of the main reasons that we kind of keep the Zone 500, just because with the Zone 550 we can kind of do it all, is that you can use anyone's thermostats with the Zone 500. So any 2, 3, or 4 wire thermostat is compatible with the 500 option on there. So in terms of the wiring, as you can see, it's very straightforward. Same setup as our Zone 550. 120 just to power up the unit itself. On pins 11 and 12 gets distributed as your zone power, so it gets distributed out to pins 3 and 10. 1 and 2 can be used as your main system pump output on there as well. 2 demand outputs on the top there for a low temp or a high temp or heating or cooling demand for a geothermal application on there. You can hook up to 4 thermostats on the top of the Zone 500, and we also provide 2 24-volt power outputs to actually power up your thermostats, rated up to 6 amps on there. So in terms of other thermostats that we can actually be used with the Zone 500, we can use our THM-100, which is again our non-programmable thermostat. We sell a lot of these thermostats just because how simple and easy it is to install on there. Again, same basic functionality wise, we can use it off the air, floor, or use that dual sensing application on there. One of the big features that you can use with the THM-100 is that it can actually be used as a set point controller as well on there. So instead of actually using a mechanical aquastat, you can actually use that as a digital aquastat with the 100. You can just use the sensor that is included again with the 100 stat and use that as your mechanical aquastat on there. So if you are using it as a set point controller, you can set that set point for heating or cooling. You can put a differential for your tank and actually a lag time for when you want it to come on after a heating or cooling demand is present on there. So it's really affordable option in terms of your domestic hot water setup, or just using it as any set point controller with the 100 option on there. In terms of the THM-200, really can do everything that the 100 can do, except we can do up to 3 stages. So we have about 8 different heating and cooling modes with the 200 option on there. Again, you can add a second additional thermistor input with the THM-100. So if you're doing a lot of heating and cooling, the 200 option is probably a better option than the THM-100 on there. We also have scheduling with the 200 where the 100 does not on there. So with the 200, as I mentioned before, 8 different heating or cooling modes. Again, you get the the setback options. You can have the room offset. Another great feature with the THM-200 is that you can actually use it as a single stage boiler control with outdoor reset if you wanted to. So if you were to put into a boiler mode on there, you can simply adjust maximum boiler temperature. You can also incorporate your outdoor design temperature. So this is what's going to set your outdoor reset curve when you implement that temperature within your outdoor design on there. You're going to put your coldest day of the year on there to set that outdoor reset curve on there. You can also put a differential for your tank. Again, we'll cut that in half. So whatever, say you were to put 10 degrees, 10 degree differential would be 5 degrees below and above that set point, and you can range that from 2 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit on there. You can have warm the shutdown on that as well, and you can also have domestic hot water priority with the 200. So very very simple, but can do a lot of different things in terms of a boiler control with the THM-200. So that's our zone control webinar for today. If you guys had any questions, I will stay on for about 5 minutes after the end of this webinar and just answer your questions. If not, you can also email us at info@hbxcontrols.com on there. You can also look at our website as well. We have a system designer, so if you were not sure of what controllers really needed for your applications, it'll ask you a series of questions, and based off your answers, it'll actually bring up what controls are needed for that application, and it actually will give you a wiring schematic for that as well on there. So it's a real good tool. We also have manuals, and we also post our webinars on our website, and we also have a live chat on our website. So if you ever need to get through technical support, which again is toll free, and you really need an answer real quick, you can also use that live chat. And we have a couple guys that are always available to answer any questions based off that live chat on there. So I thank everyone for turning in, attending this webinar. Feel free to keep checking on as well. Each month we do offer webinars for each control types on there. So again, thank you guys for joining, and I'll stay on for about 5 more minutes to answer any questions. Thank you. With the Zone 500, in terms of daisy chaining them, it just daisy chains them through that 32 pin connector. It actually has wireless demand outputs on there in terms of your demands. So say you had 3 Zone 550s next to each other, and that second or third zone were called for heating or cooling, you would just put that demand output from that first zone controller, so zones 1 to 4, and that'll wirelessly communicate that demands through that Zone 500. And that's just a 24-volt contact. John, we're actually going to do a dedicated webinar for the B2 metering, just because there's a lot of information. So we try to do everything within the webinars within an hour or less, just because everyone's very busy these days. So I will be posting up a dedicated B2 metering webinar just for that product. Yeah. Like anywhere, like you can put it here, something just as a special. I don't think it can go in. There's no place, or maybe even here, wherever you want. It's just a special one, like this one or something.
just as long as it's needs flow proofs, which it has to have one, or this can be jumpered if there is no flow proof switch. That should have been put in the manual. I don't know if you want to word it better. That's just.
Hey, Michael. Yeah, the Eco 550 and the Zone 550 can definitely be used in conjunction to operate heating or cooling zones, and with our Wi-Fi zoning system as well on there. So that's where the demand outputs come into play in terms of the heating and cooling demand outputs. You would just wire those up. You wouldn't wire those demand outputs from your heat pumps to the Zone 500. You would actually just wire those demand outputs into pins, the first 4 pins on the Eco 550. So whenever it gets a heating or cooling demand, the Eco 550 would know that based off those demands, either to turn on your heat pumps based for heating or based off of cooling and activating that reversing valve on there. You can also look at the back of the Eco 550 or the Zone 500 wiring schematic, and that'll kind of give you a more clear way of how you would wire those up in conjunction with each other on there. In terms of your Zone 500 and Zone 550, the only really reason you'd want to maybe use the Zone 500 is maybe you just is really depending on stats. If you didn't want to use our thermostats and say they're doing maybe you're doing like a retrofit and the end user still wants to use the same stat that they've always been wanting to be using, then that's where you would probably want to use the 500. Why you'd use the 500 instead of the Zone 550. Other than that, that's the only reason I can think on top of my head why you would want to use the Zone 500 is that they're really stuck on using someone else's thermostat.
Yes, sorry, I didn't catch that. Thank you for catching that. No, you're right. Real pain, yes, I can feel a lot of it.
To answer your question about the 0 to 10, Michael, yeah, there could be a way to do that. So for your fan coil operation, you would want to use the zone output for that fan coil zone, which would then signal to our other controller, our CPU 550, to send that 0 to 10 to that fan coil on there. So there would be a way to do that as well. To do that, so might not be the way you may like to do it, but yeah, there's always a way to kind of go around those ways of doing the 0 to 10.